So I know some of you, seeing the faces on the call and the names, I know some of you are part of our coal ash community groups that have worked hard in the last few years to get a lot of work done in coal ash. So welcome. This is going to be a lot of review, I think, for many of you that are in that group. But I'm also seeing a lot of faces that probably only hear about coal ash from our emails or maybe reading our blog posts. So today I'm going to try to do a sort of a fast version of covering what's happening on coal ash. It's been kind of a really busy few years, and it's only going to get busier. So that's good news because I think we're getting a lot done. But it also means that there's a lot to cover. So my goal here is to get you kind of jumped up to where we are now and have an idea of what to expect next. That's sort of the big goal. But just flagging that there's a lot of history here that is going to get touched on, but moved past rather quickly. Let's see. Before I go in much further, just so you know who I am, Andrew Rehn. I'm a water resources engineer with Prairie Rivers Network. I've been here for 7 years, I think now, which is kind of crazy. I'm on our water and energy team. I studied at University of Illinois. I got a master's and a bachelor's in civil engineering. My favorite river is the Middle Fork, and my favorite board game is Spirit Island. If anybody's played that, it's great. If you have played it by any chance, just, I don't know, say something in the chat. So here's what I'm planning to go over today. First, what is coal ash? In case anybody doesn't know, really quick reminder of what the issue is. And then I'm going to talk about sort of what we're doing in terms of regulation and legislation statewide. And then zoom in on the Middle Fork for some updates there, and then just kind of forecast what will be coming up next. So what is coal ash? Let me just pull up the chat so I see if there's questions. What is coal ash? So coal ash is the byproduct of burning coal. So much like you would have after a campfire, when you burn coal, there's material that's left over. It takes a couple forms. There's bottom ash, which is the stuff that sort of stays at the bottom. There's fly ash, which is stuff that would have gone up and left the boiler or the smokestack out the smokestack, but often that has been through air quality technology captured, and that also joins the coal ash waste stream. And as other air technology, air pollution control technology gets added to a power plant, unfortunately, that doesn't make the pollution magically go away. It just isn't in the air anymore, and it means it ends up in a different waste stream. So what's in the coal ash waste stream has been changing. It changes site by site. It changes depending on what coal is being burned and what treatment technologies are at the site. But it's sort of a complex waste stream. And a lot of what is found in coal naturally occurring, things like heavy metals or other toxins, are concentrated in what's left over in the coal ash. So many of these things are harmful to human health. So there's really sort of a smorgasbord of different pollutants that you find, things like arsenic, boron, chromium, lead, or thallium, but also the whole list on the right. There's just a lot of different things that can be found in coal ash. And these all affect the human body in different ways. And what is present at a site really changes, again, depending on what treatment technology and source of the coal, et cetera, was used. So when we're investigating coal ash sites, we have to really investigate for a wide swath of these chemicals to make sure that we're really detecting what might be there. So in terms of management and how this has become a problem, coal ash is stored in large coal ash impoundments. So you're seeing a picture here of the E.D. Edwards plant. This is on the Illinois River near Peoria. And the impoundment is what you see on the left. Let me see if I can't get a little laser pointer thing going here. Whoa. Well, spotlight. Aha. So this on the left is a coal ash impoundment. It's usually a berm. They'll sort of build a raised area with a berm around it, and then they start putting the ash into the center of it. It's sluiced over from the power plant typically, which means that they sort of bring it over with water. And that's sort of the first moment that the ash is exposed to water, but it's also obviously open to rain. These impoundments are also in size. So not only are they sort of building a a berm, an elevated area around it to make their pit, they're also digging it into the ground. So this is what a typical coal ash impoundment might look like. And these things store coal ash over decades of these power plants being operated, and they'll fill up this pond, and then they might build a second pond and fill it up. The volumes are huge. You can see the power plant here compared to the size of the impoundment. It dwarfs a power plant, which is a pretty big, which are typically pretty big buildings. So coal ash impoundments it's a lot of material that's been stored in these things. Just to note that not only are there impoundments, but there's also landfills and historic dumps. These are going to sound like you're going to think of these things as looking really similar, but in terms of how we deal with them and how they're regulated, they're different, and I'll get into some of those distinctions later. But just some examples here. The Nearfield facility is next to Illinois' largest power plant, the Prairie State Power Plant down in southern Illinois, 7th largest single polluter in the country. This is the size of their proposed landfill. And we have a great image of this pink square superimposed over most of downtown Chicago. This is a square mile. It's huge. And that's they have a coal ash landfill there. It's managed a little bit differently than impoundment, but it is another way that coal ash is stored. We also have things that we call historic dumps or legacy ash or a bunch of different names. This is the Joliet River, and this chunk of land here it's just coal ash. That is coal ash that was stored there when this plant was operated years ago, and it sort of falls a bit outside of current regulation. Although we are digging into it with things like lawsuits, they're still polluting groundwater, so we still have some hooks. So these are sort of different ways that coal ash is found and managed or mismanaged, and ways that we need to address through our regulations. So like I said, going pretty quick, that's kind of big picture of what we're looking at here. In terms of how coal ash is regulated in Illinois, some recent history. Back in 2019, folks on this call probably helped pass the Coal Ash Pollution Prevention Act. Thank you, everybody. This was really sort of national groundbreaking legislation that set Illinois on a course to having its own state rules. These rules are meant to mirror and exceed the federal rules. So there are federal rules of coal ash. This is sort of saying Illinois taking charge of those rules and also saying we're going to do a little bit better. And that little bit better shows up in a lot of places, one of which is financial assurances. These huge companies have to put money down if they want to be closing these, as they go to operate and then close these power plants. They have to have money in the form of bonds or real money to pay for that closure. If they disappear and go bankrupt, we'll still have that assurance. So the bill passes, and then we go into something called a rulemaking. That's where you take the language of a bill, which is typically higher level, more abstract, and you get down to the gritty details. So this is what Illinois EPA needs to know. Okay, how are we actually going to run this program? What are we actually doing? What are we actually asking polluters to do? What are the details of public meeting requirements, et cetera? So this rulemaking process happens in front of the Illinois Pollution Control Board, and over the course of 2020 and a little bit into 2021, we had multiple hearings running through the pandemic. Just like everything else, we figured out how to do it all over Zoom, or much of it over Zoom, although there was still in-person stuff. And we argued it out. Our legal team, which is comprised of experts from tons of groups, Earth Justice, Sierra Club, Environmental Law and Policy Center. We've got a really great team of lawyers that work on this coal ash stuff with us, and we made the case for stronger rules for identifying those places where we could go above and beyond the federal rules. And we did pretty good. So the rulemaking finished last year around March, and we're happy with a lot of the outcomes of that rulemaking. We think that we have definitions that will be advantageous to us as we go forward, and I'll get into some more details later. But that's now done, and now we have rules. We have our regulations, and we've begun what I'll call the implementation of those rules. Yeah, so we're moving into sort of those rules playing out. So here are some of the major outcomes of the rulemaking. So the first is rules for impoundment permitting. So this is basically, if you have a coal ash impoundment, you need to get permits to both operate and to close it. So we've got clarifications around those operation permits, around those closure permits, also around corrective action, which means you're polluting, you have to correct that. What is the corrective action that you're going to take to stop polluting? So these are sort of the I guess like the real meat of the rules is how are we regulating impoundments? One of the unfortunate things that we didn't get in the Coal Ash Pollution Prevention Act was regulating those landfills and historic dumps that I mentioned. So we're regulating impoundments, and a lot of coal ash is stored in impoundments in the state, but we don't have specific regulations for those landfills or those historic dumps. But the board said, okay, you've convinced us that these are problems. Senate Bill 9 did not tell us to regulate these, so we're not going to like write that now, but we are going to open a second rulemaking. So it's called the sub docket, and that rulemaking is where we're going to be, arguing over how landfills, how historic ash dumps, how things like fugitive dust and environmental justice should be defined or regulated, and that's happening in the second rulemaking. And the last outcome of the rulemaking was essentially industry said, wait, we don't like this, and they filed a bunch of challenges and exemptions and that sort of thing to the rulemaking. So these are kind of the three spaces that we're operating in now in the coal ash world. One is we're now implementing, we're doing that permitting process. Two is, all right, that sub docket, let's still argue over the details of what regulation should look like. And then three is fighting off industries, saying, hey, this impoundment should be exempt or that impoundment should be exempt, and actually some overall just challenges to the rules in general. So those are the three spaces that we're in, and just to share a little bit more details. So for impoundment permitting, this looks like two things. One is an operating permit. An operating permit is what you would need to have if they opened a new impoundment for some reason, the first thing they would need to get is an operating permit. This is sort of the ongoing tasks of managing the impoundment. Includes groundwater monitoring, fugitive dust, that's a term that means like if you have ash that's dry and it blows away, that's fugitive dust. How is that regulated? Plans and protections against flood, emergency response plans. These things sort of fall under the operating permit. We also have a program for construction permits. And when I say construction permit, you should be thinking about closure. You should be thinking about what we've talked about for a long time, which is most of industry wants to cap and leave, which is to cover the top of their ash pond, leave it there forever. And removal is the alternative of digging it up and putting it in a modern storage facility. So those construction permits obviously they do not have to do those until they need to close. The thing is, most of these things need to close. By the federal rule, if you're polluting, you have to move towards closure, and believe it or not, nearly all these ponds are polluting. Also, many of these power plants are closing, and once the power plant closes, the ash pond has to close within a few years. So these things are all moving towards closure at a really quick rate. Pretty soon, nobody's going to be running impoundments in Illinois. We did develop rules for what happens if somebody creates a new impoundment, but it's unlikely to happen. So that's sort of what falls into permitting. The general process, and specifically the closure permit process, which is again the one that I think we're really interested in because we really want to know what's going to happen to this waste in the long term. Is it going to sit here forever? Is it going to go somewhere else? What this process looks like is first a public meeting. And a bunch of public meetings happened last December. You might have heard us talking about them, one of which was for Vermilion, but also across the state. They happened in Waukegan and Springfield and Hennepin, Havana, and Joliet, and maybe a few other places. So there were a number of these public meetings. This is the company saying, hey, here's what we plan to do. Public, we'd like your input before we apply to the Illinois EPA to do this thing. The agency actually isn't involved here. It's sort of between us, the public, and the company. So then they take that input if they want, and they apply to the EPA. And then the EPA takes their application, reviews it, and they can deny it, or they can say, okay, we approve it, or we modify it in this way and propose a draft permit. So EPA goes and it has a proposal. And this is where we get our formal public process. This is where we have a public comment period. The comments have to be responded by Illinois. The Illinois EPA has to respond to those comments, so they have to defend their actions. We can also request a hearing. We can turn up at the hearing, ask questions in person. This is sort of our real, we fought for strong public participation, and this is where that's going to play out. And then after that, they could deny the permit based on public comments, or they could issue the permit. A number of different outcomes could happen. This sort of public comment period, the catch here is that EPA, there's no fixed timeline. EPA is working on these permits, and they will release them when they're available for review. So we don't know exactly when we'll have these public comment periods. To touch briefly on what is happening in terms of closures right now, these are the sites that have proposed closure plans. In the rules and in the law, we said, okay, we recognize that there's a lot of these sites that need to close. Let's come up with a prioritization scheme so that we close the ones that are the most problematic first, and then we let the ones that are less problematic be closed later. Illinois EPA is not going to be able to handle all of these at once. So these were ones that fell within the first 4 closure prioritization categories, and they all had to have public meetings back in December. Their permits were due in February, their permit applications. And they all submitted permit applications, I think, besides Wood River, who is late, and we don't know exactly what's happening there. And now those applications are actually available online. The owners' websites are all available online. I should have put the link in here. And you can read those proposals on your own. Of those, most of them are, unsurprisingly, caps. The owners are proposing to cap coal ash at nearly every site. One interesting site here is Waukegan, where they proposed capping one pond and removing another, and a bill passed today on the Senate floor that would require removal at Waukegan. I don't know the status of the House, but there's this session. When I say today, I mean I think 20 minutes ago or 30 minutes ago. So Waukegan ash is moving. There's another piece of legislation that's going to be forcing removal there. Another one is Vermilion here. You'll see this says removal next to Vermilion. Wow, did not a couple years ago that would have been huge news, and it is huge news. But we fought long and hard for that one, and I'll go into more details later. Yeah, so removal there. Joliet 29, those are pretty small ash ponds. They're removing those just so they can probably dump it in Lincoln Stone Quarry, to be honest. Otherwise, we're still seeing a lot of caps. So this is really going to be an interesting conversation. We're going to have to look at the details of these plans to see, exactly what they're proposing. But it'll be interesting to see how Illinois EPA responds. Are they on board for plans like this, or are they going to be holding the bar a little higher? We don't know. And so, we're sort of in that first implementation phase of how these things are going to play out. And when Illinois EPA decides to issue those draft permits, that's when we'll know if sort of we're going in a path where most will be capped and a few will be removed, or if it'll be the opposite. We're really learning a lot, and we have an opportunity to be involved in that process the whole way, which is, what was the big win of our bill, is that public participation was extremely robust. The rulemaking subdocket, I already touched on this, so I'll just basically skip it, but these are the 4 issues that we need to dig into. This is going to move slow because the Illinois Pollution Control Board kind of gets to decide the pace, and if they don't want to deal with it, or if they're too busy, they just won't deal with it. And because we don't have a legislation backing it, we don't have a lot of hooks to say you must move forward, which is unfortunate, but we can keep pushing. And then the last is these industry petitions. And I can skip the details here, but essentially they're requesting adjusted standards and variances for their impoundment. So at Wood River, the West Ash Pond, we believe that it should be an exception to the rule for this reason. And these are all going to the Pollution Control Board. And generally, we've been seeing the Illinois EPA step up and defend the new regs, which is exciting and what we want to see. Essentially saying, hey, no, we said you were going to be regulated this way, and we're going to continue to regulate you that way. There's, I think, 13 of these or 11 of these, so each one might go a different way, but it should surprise nobody that industry is throwing up all the defenses they can against trying not to have to spend a bunch of money doing the right thing. So with that, that's kind of where we stand on the sort of the overall. We're going to do a quick zoom in on the Middle Fork, and then we can get to some questions. So for folks who aren't in the area, the Middle Fork of the Vermilion River is Illinois' only national scenic river. It's located over here in east central Illinois, and it's a favorite river of myself and many of our members, and anybody in Illinois who hasn't had a chance to come check out our only national scenic river should really come down sometime and float the river. You'll be able to see some coal ash firsthand, but you'll also be able to see a really beautiful stretch of just great natural space in the middle of sort of cornfield Illinois. Like I said, really beautiful. This is a picture taken from our drone of the river in right in fall as some color was coming into the trees. Rest in peace, our drone. We had a little mishap this year, so pictures like this might not be as available. Like I said, great for canoeing, kayaking, a lot of fun, hanging out in the sandbars, floating in tubes, floating in canoes, kayaks, whatever you want. It's a great time. A lot of great wildlife. There's eagles that nest there continually. I've never seen otters there, but supposedly there are even river otters. Blue herons, typically you can follow a blue heron down the river for a little while before it figures out that it should fly upstream past you and you'll stop facing it. And tons of other wildlife, turtles, snakes, deer, just it's a natural space and you get to see a lot of natural life. The one exception to that 17 miles of public land that I didn't mention, 17 miles of public protected land for the National Scenic River, is the Dynegy property. So Dynegy, or Vistra is their owner now, owns the Vermilion Power Station, and this whole chunk of land is all coal ash located along the river. This is river. So sort of a top-down view. You were looking south in the last picture, so you see our 3 coal ash ponds located directly adjacent to the river, and there's a couple problems here. One is that the ponds are leaking. These ash ponds are not lined, and that means that they are in contact with the groundwater. That groundwater is leaching pollution out of the coal ash, and that pollution is heading towards our river. What you see on this riverbank here is orange staining due to oxidizing iron, which is carrying with it not just the iron, but the other pollutants that we find in coal ash. And this is an area downstream. In certain conditions, you can see that it really starts to pool and discolor significant parts of the river. Another problem at the site, so not just sort of the continual, perpetual seeping of pollution into the river, is the location. So again, this is an aerial image of the site. What I'm going to show you next is topographical elevation data, LiDAR, if folks are familiar with that. So I kind of like to think of it as almost like an X-ray on the land. And you can see here where these things are located in the floodplain. Here's our river, and here are these high bluffs on either side of the river. And this thing is really stuck. The river is stuck between this bluff here and these coal ash ponds right here. And it's going towards those ponds. It's been going towards those ponds for years and will continue to go towards those ponds. So absent any action, this could be a site where we have a catastrophe like we've seen at other sites where coal ash ponds are eroded away and then the ash dumps itself into the river and we have a pristine river that's been ruined potentially forever by a massive spill of coal ash. So these are kind of the two problems that we've been fighting for a long time. And a really long and important story short is that Prairie Rivers Network and Eco Justice Collaborative and Earth Justice have been working together to fight for this river for a long time. And this looks like a ton of advocacy. This looks like a lot of grassroots work. This looks like a lot of legal work, policy work, everything in between. And again, just to cut the story short, that pressure has finally paid off in big ways. So eventually we got the Illinois EPA to send a notice of violation to Vistra. That notice of violation went to the Illinois Attorney General, and the Attorney General and Vistra deliberated for a very, very long time and ultimately reached an interim agreement. And that agreement was that Vistra was going to close those coal ash ponds. They're going to use our new rules, our new regulations to close those ponds, but they're only allowed to propose removal. That's all they're allowed to say is we're removing. They can't say we're going to cap it. They can't propose any caps. It's only removal. And not only that, but they ended up proposing something that we had long called for. They're going to be demolishing the power plant and building a landfill on site where the power plant used to be. So again, going to do a little X-ray thing here. We've got the blue area is the bluffs above the floodplain of the river, and the orange area is the floodplain. The dark orange is the actual river itself. So this is up maybe 100 feet above the river. And so by building the landfill there, we've moved it away. That ash is now safe from being eroded and collapsing into the middle fork. So they're going to be demolishing the power plant, building a landfill, moving all ash on site, that includes all 3 ponds, into the proposed landfill. This is huge. This is a really, really big win that we've called for. We sent them designs for a proposed land, like 10% designs for a proposed landfill a long time ago, saying, "Hey, have you thought about this idea?" And I was honestly a little bit shocked to see that this was the solution they ultimately proposed. The schedule that they're saying is 2033 is when it will be completed. And I know that's a while, but it does take a long time to demolish the power plant, build a landfill that will be pretty big, and excavate all of the ash and move it to that landfill. But we might, in not that long, be safe knowing that the Middle Fork will be preserved and this one more threat to the Middle Fork solved forever, which is fantastic. So just so folks know the timeline of what you can expect there. There was a public meeting where Dynegy presented this, Vistra Dynegy presented this solution to the public last December. They submitted their permit application on February 1st, where they submitted their here's what we'd like to propose to Illinois EPA. Illinois EPA will review that and propose a draft permit for public comment, hopefully sometime this year. We don't know for sure. Sometime in 2022 is when, well, no, I don't even know if it's 2022. Sometime they will propose a permit, and we will have our public comment period, we'll have our hearing, and we'll be able to dig into some of those details and have our voices be heard in this process. But I mean, the good news is that this looks good. I mean, we really got a solution. The devil's in the details, and there's certainly ways to do this better and worse, and there are things that we're going to need to continue to provide input on. But it's like we've got our 80-90% of what we wanted, and we're just going to be arguing over that last 10-20% to make sure this is done right. And we're going to need to track it for another 10 years. We're going to have to, just like we've been tracking it for the last 10 years or longer, we're going to have to make sure that, yeah, okay, so how is the excavation actually going? What are they actually doing? Are they, if there's any, are they doing it safely? Or if there's an emergency, like what happens? Do they have protections for the river? These details are important, but knowing that we're on the right course for the first time in a long time is just, it's huge. It's so exciting. So, so that's kind of where we are. And what's next is that we do this at every single site. There's, we go through this permit application process. We review the permit. We go to public hearings, and we fight it out at. I mean, there's 24, 25 sites in Illinois with coal ash, depending on how you count. And sometimes multiple ponds, and those might be applied separately or together. But we're anticipating a long sort of continued engagement. But we've given the public the tools to be able to engage in this process and have a voice. So I'm hopeful that going forward we'll be able to get outcomes that communities who live in this area, in the areas of these impoundments, would like.